After watching the video Unforgotten 25 years after Willowbrook, I learned that this building was technically classified as a school, even though only 20% of the students in the building actually went to classes. They had serious cuts in funding, and due to these cuts in funding, they had a serious lack of staff. Their resident-to-staff ratio should have been roughly 4-1, but it was, in more cases, 30 to 40 to 1. A lot of injuries were sustained by the residents, either through abuse or through self-inflicted injuries, and there was a problem with misdiagnosis.
The article Freak Show, a dehumanizing display, talks about how demeaning freak shows were. And for example, there was Mary Ann Bevan, who was labeled the ugliest woman in the world. She put herself in the freak show position because her husband passed away and she was a single mother with 4 children at home that she had to provide for. Freak shows exploit people with disabilities while also highlighting and ostracizing those who are different from perceived norms.
After looking through the photo essay Christmas in Purgatory, I learned that it was showing other state institutions for people who had intellectual disabilities. The average amount spent per resident of the state institutions was about $4.55. The average capacity of the buildings was usually roughly 350 patients over the capacity that it was allowed, and they also had wait lists of over 300. They used restraining devices on the students. They had very unclean facilities. They were very separated from what reality actually was, and they had places titled lunatic boxes, which were where they would keep dangerous patients confined.
In the video called The Real Helen Keller was perceived to be brought out of an oblivion through the use of language. She's often seen as the world's most famous disabled person. She was a big advocate for women's suffrage and civil rights. She knew she drew crowds, so she used that to advocate her political views. And although she was portrayed as a mild old lady, she had FBI surveillance on her.
These two sources I put together, A Day in Our Shoes and the Museum of Disability History, because both of these sources were educational resources. They both provided different lesson planning ideas that could be used as resources and could be implemented into the classroom and other lessons to teach students about disabilities. These sites both gave packets, questions, games, books, songs, and more to help teachers be able to implement this into their lessons.
In the video Who is Perfect, mannequins are made out of people with disabilities exactly by their body measurements. This is important because it challenges why the standard body image is always used when there are so many different types. You can see just how happy it makes the people who have had their bodies made into mannequins. Oh.
I also checked out the blog The Specials. It's a blog about a television series, and I really like it because it diminishes a lot of the stigma around people with disabilities living a normal life. And it is very contrasted to Willowbrook because this is a house where people with intellectual disabilities are able to live their fullest life rather than at Willowbrook where they were really separated and diminished as humans.
On the Special Olympics website, I learned how the Special Olympics changes lives of people with intellectual disabilities. The next game is in 2023 in Berlin, and there are a lot of different volunteer opportunities that are available, and they can be long-term or short-term. Athletes inspire people everywhere to open their hearts to a wider world of human talents and potential. Special Olympics founder Eunice Kennedy Shriver turned her anger over injustices endured by people with intellectual disabilities into a movement that changed the world.
While reading the article Tolerate This, I found the story of Penny, the first grader, pretty interesting. I questioned why the teacher thought that it would be beneficial to bring the students into the special education classroom because it more or less shows them as being on display. I also questioned the use of the word tolerate, both to first graders because they probably don't really understand what's going on or what's being said to them, and in general because using the word tolerate makes it seem like we should be tolerating people with intellectual disabilities rather than accepting them. And some empathy tips that were given in this article is to speak at eye level, don't lean on or over wheelchairs, and talk to them and not their caregiver.
In the article, Empathy Not Sympathy, I learned how when it comes to assisting people with disabilities, it is best to ask if they would like assistance, and if so, to allow them to tell you how you can help. And if the person declines, you should respect that. You should relax and don't make assumptions and treat adults as adults, and also address the individual, not their companion or interpreter. In the article, Would You Call My Child the R Word? My views were reinforced that the R word is just an overall demeaning word, and by using it, people are spreading the idea that people who have intellectual disabilities are stupid, less than, slow, and incompetent.
In discussing our articles, we found a lot of similarities between my article of Tolerate This and Kim's article Empathy Not Sympathy. Some of the main similarities we saw is that both of our articles gave us tips on using empathy. Some of the tips that I saw in mine is that we should speak at eye level, don't lean on or over wheelchairs, and make sure you talk to them and not their caregiver.
My article, Empathy Not Sympathy, also talked about very similar tips and ideas when assisting people with disabilities. Some that stood out to me are relax, don't make assumptions, and treat adults as adults. When discussing the article, Would You Call My Child the R Word?, Michaela and I both agree that using the R word is demeaning and spreads the idea that people with disabilities are less than.
We actually have a project on campus. It's usually through the education club, and it's called Spread the Word to End the Word. We usually have a banner. It's outside either the CAF or the den where people can sign and they pledge to stop use of the R word, which is a really good project to have on campus, especially with education students around.